Hey everybody, JP here, and today we are going to take a deep dive into Randy Staub's drum mixing techniques. Now I'm going by three sources to get you this information. The first is a producer, engineer, friend of mine who had some tracks mixed by Randy about 10 years ago. And he asked me not to mention his name for professional reasons, probably because he still wants to work with Randy. But I am at liberty to share some of the things that he shared with me after he attended those mixes. So we've got that. We've also got a wonderful article from Sound on Sound magazine from I think about 2010 or 2011 about Randy mixing some tracks for Evanescence. And he even shares the recall notes that his assistant Zach took during those sessions. So we've got some stuff from that we're going to get into, and I'll also link that down in the description. And then going way back to the Black Album, as I mentioned in the Randy Staub Dynacomp video, that I have watched and rewatched and taken notes on the Year and a Half in the Life of Metallica documentary. And there's still a lot of things from back then that he uses in his mixes today. And hey, if you mix one of the biggest selling albums of all time, even if that was, 35 years ago now, something like that, you know, obviously you're gonna keep doing a lot of stuff that got you there. So, you know, between that and actually a lot of the Black Album stuff came from Dr. Feelgood, because it was actually the drum sounds from that album why Metallica reached out to Bob Rock in the first place to do the Black Album. So we're going to go through all that, and we're going to talk about his use of samples, one of which I am using here. If you remember from the Dynacomp video, we've got the Black Album snare drum. This is the same track from that Dynacomp. And even though my friend did not confirm that he saw Dynacomp in those mixes, I've got it in here on a mono parallel bus with the kick and snare, just like in that video. So let me play you a little bit, and we'll see where we're at here. All right, we'll get to the guitar and bass in another video. First thing I want to talk about is that snare drum reverb, because that goes all the way back to Dr. Feelgood and the Black Album. And I was listening to some tracks, some isolated drum tracks from one of the Alice in Chains albums that Randy mixed, and I was so happy to hear that same reverb. It was like nostalgic. So Randy's snare reverb is the old AMS RMX unit. And of course, Valhalla Vintage Verb does a really cool version of it called Non-Lin. It's got a bit of a gated sound to it. Actually, I've also got some EMT 250 here. Let me mute that. So when you're in this mode, the attack control gives you three different ways to work. It gives you exponential. You can get up to 50%, and it's gated. And then inverse. And those are three of the famous modes from the RMX unit. So I was rocking it somewhere around 35%. Somewhere in between exponential and gated. Yeah. And as you can hear, we got the timing of it to really work within the tempo of this song. So it adds quite a bit to the snare, as you can hear there. Then I've also got the EMT 250, which is another Bob Rock, Randy Staub favorite. Just to show you what that's doing by itself, let's mute the AMS. So that's kind of the snare reverb we're used to. It's really similar to the Brendan O'Brien style. Kind of just a more natural digital reverb, whereas the RMX is very unnatural, but it's also infamous for that sound. Another huge part of the overall drum sound are the overheads. And when I first heard about this, I was blown away. Look at all of that 100 hertz shelf in our overheads. If I take it out, that might be a little more conventional. But he cranks this into his overheads. Pre-compressor. I've actually been really digging this. This is the 40th anniversary 1176 AE on overheads lately. Just adds a little bit more excitement to them. And just like the Brendan O'Brien drum video, I am using the stereo width to match the rooms. And he also boosts quite a bit into the rooms. I'm just doing it on the SSL here. But I've got quite a bit of 100 hertz in the room mics. Mono room, I'm just doing the old talkback limiter. But they all work really nicely together. So yeah, this is another case where the overheads, it's really a full kit sound. And so when I first heard about the 100 hertz thing, I said, you can't be serious. Like, that's gotta be a side chain or something, right? And then I remembered, it actually started on Motley Crue with Tommy Lee's drums. What they did, Tommy Lee wanted to feel like he was playing live at a concert. He wanted all the low ends that he gets from the subs on a stage. So what they did was they had these giant 36-inch Mitsubishi subwoofer speakers. I mean, these things are like, 5 feet tall. And they positioned them in the room and then used a 100 hertz crossover and pumped his drums back out into the room while he was playing. So it was basically like he was sitting on a subwoofer in the room. And he was able to really get into the feel of the drums. So they did the same thing for Metallica. So all the room mics, all the overheads mics, everything that they were using during the drums had this massive amount of 100 hertz in it. And so when that crossed my mind, I was like, so he's so used to that it affects the way he mixes. In other words, he wants that in there because he was so used to having it. And here I am, all these years I was thinking they just filtered it out of those microphones. But no, he learned to live with it and loved it, actually, from those sessions. So I thought that was really cool. That's just one of many throwbacks to those first two massive albums that he and Bob Rock did together that, he still employs these days. It's crazy. And yeah, if you listen to those Alice in Chains tracks, I'll see if I can find them. Maybe I'll link them in the description if I can get away with doing that. Yeah, there's tons of low end in those drums. Tons of low end, tons of that AMS RMX reverb in them as well. So now let's talk about the kick drum. Randy is a tremendous fan of the GML 8200 equalizer. And he's a fan of it because of the insane amount of headroom it has before clipping. So what I've done here, originally, well, that's the drum by itself with just a little bit of Pultec on it. So this is the EQ that I had on this drum in the last video, just on the SSL. And that's cool. I tried to duplicate these same settings in the Massenburg plugin. But because of all the extra headroom in here, I actually had to alter them just a little bit for that reason. To get the same sound, I could go a little further with the Massenburg, which was really interesting. And in some areas, I didn't have to go as far as the SSL. But I've heard someone describe using the Massenburg 8200 as almost like using a transient designer because it lets so much more transient through than the majority of EQs do. And this is both hardware and software. And the Massenburg DesignWorks EQ absolutely lives up to that description to me. If you bypass it, listen to the SSL again, what you realize is on the SSL, so much of what you're hearing and so much of what I like about it is actually hitting the wall when you do these massive boosts. Like you're really kind of overloading it and getting a bit of clipping just from the EQ. And I'm like, yeah, you kind of forget when you use it all the time, but that's one of the things that you love so much about the SSL EQ. And to me, the difference between hitting the wall and clipping the SSL EQ and then not having that in the Massenburg is really like the difference between an Andy Wallace mix and a Randy mix in a lot of ways. Whereas Andy's all about hitting that wall and pushing the SSL, which is what it's so great at. But then with the Massenburg, you just get all this headroom for days, and it really adds to the sound. So I also tried the Pulsar GML 8200, and I kind of did the similar thing. That the settings didn't carry over exactly, but I tried to match the curves as closely as I could, and it's similar. I personally think the Massenburg design works. It sounds a little better up top. I just couldn't get the same kind of top out of this, no matter how much I boosted it, than I could out of the Massenburg. I mean, again, it's subtle. It's very close. And you could certainly get by on the SSL if you have to. But yeah, the MDW EQ6 wins this little shootout. Little unscientific shootout. And then, of course, add the Dynacomp in there, and that's your kick. Snare. That's our Black Album snare sample from the wonderful Black Album sample library put out by, I believe it's Chocolate Audio. I have it for Contact, but it's available for BFD as well. Really, really fantastic. So this is a close mic snare and I think just one pair of room mics. They give you a lot to work with in that sample library. And I'm feeding it to the reverb. That's without reverb. So much of that sound comes from that fantastic non-lin reverb. This is the snare from the Brendan O'Brien video that so many of you love so much. Actually, this wonderful Kiive plugin made it work a lot better for a Randy mix too. That's without it. It has that wood piccolo knock on the door. But the combination of the transient control, where I'm losing all of the transient, and the compressor really, really kills on this. And this distortion and saturation help too. And you can bypass each by itself. That's without any of the drive. That's without the dynamics. So yeah, this, I kind of just tried this on a whim. I hadn't used it before, and I threw it on the snare and was really, really happy with what it did. Shaped it in a very nice way. Again, that fit this mix better. And then we've also got a parallel distressor bus. This is a Randy thing. I've got both snares going into it, both the mic'd snare and the sample. So adds a whole lot of life to it. Reminds me a lot of the Brendan O'Brien 1176 snare. And I'm also following with the Sontec. So yeah, Randy's big on the GML 8200 and the Sontec EQP1A. Now let's talk about some toms. So, really similar to the tom video we did in the past. I'm sending them down a bus, pitching them down a fifth. I'm just using the ProTools Pitch 2 for this. This is the same setup I did, just instead of the Eventide, I'm gonna keep my processor, give my processor a little breathing room. I'm just using the Pitch 2 for it on here. And a little bit of Valhalla vintage verb mixed in at about a 60% mix. Again, don't think of this as a reverb send, think of it as a parallel bus, and And this will make a lot more sense in your brain. And again, that's a thing that goes back to Black Album and probably Dr. Feelgood, but definitely the Black Album. And in terms of the individual toms, boosting some 8K shelf on top, boosting some, what's that, 4.5. This is on the high tom. Pulling out some 520 and boosting some 128. And then if we look at the floor, again, 8K shelf, boosting about 5K, pulling out 570 on the floor, and then boosting 120. And a little bit of gate and compression, nothing too drastic going on there. What I am doing pretty drastically is the drum parallel bus. And I'm building that drum submix on buses 13 and 14 via these small faders here, which I blew up just to show that it is a different mix than the overall drums. I'm kind of doing a little less cymbals in there and a little more of some other things. Again, this goes back to the Black Album because this is when SSL first released the stereo bus compressor in rack mount form. I'm at 4-to-1, relatively fast attack, auto makeup. He said the whole thing about doing this is to really just make the drum sound bigger. I'm also running it back through an SSL channel, mainly for the saturation, as he would do on the console. And I'm also rolling off some top. Just don't need all that cymbal in there. It'll allow the actual overhead mics to sound a little cleaner in the mix. Oh, I think I had this at about, 10. That's without. So I'd say that's doing its job. And then we're gonna get into this in a separate video, but he slams the hell out of the SSL bus compressor. And these are the settings that my buddy noticed during his mix. 30 millisecond attack, fastest release, 4-to-1, and about 8 dB of gain reduction. Randy has said himself he can get as far as 10 to 12 dB. Unfortunately, the console compressor handles it a lot better than the plugin does. The plugin starts to get a little weird once you pass that point. Even the outboard unit starts to get weird when you pass that point. For some reason, in the console, you can kill it a lot harder. And then Randy also mixes through a Sontec EQ he boosts a 100 hertz shelf, he boosts a 12K shelf on top, and then he boosts 2.2K, and he boosts, my buddy told me it was 300, the closest we could get on here is 280. And I was like, that's a weird frequency to boost, but without it, it's like, really weird. Best way to describe it. If I pull it out, you miss it. At least I miss it. Fills things in so nicely. That's the 2.2 without it. But overall without it, actually, you kick everything on for that. So yeah, that makes a huge difference. I've never been one to mix into an EQ before, and generally I don't even start mixing into the bus comp, but for Randy's work, knowing that he does, that's what I did, and I'm really happy with how it all sounds. So this concludes our Randy Staub drum bus overview, and I think I covered everything I wanted to. If I think of anything else, I'll just make another video on it, but I think we got through it all. So yeah, I will be back to talk about bass and guitar. That might be two separate videos, and then probably we're going to do an EQ comparison and a compression setting comparison on his master bus, because he used some different settings on the Evanescence mix, and then I saved those presets, and I'll also want to show the difference between 3 to 4 dB versus 8 dB of compression on the same setting, etc. So we're going to go through all that, but I hope you enjoyed this for now. And as always, please like, comment, subscribe, all that great stuff. All right, guys, take care. Talk soon.